How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I wanted to do a podcast on agave genetics, talking about the different agave that um, you might want to use. Um, I'll start this off by saying that I'm not a scientist or an agave geneticist or researcher or anything like that. I'm just a small nursery, small farm, and a small collector of agave. So, my family has grown it for multiple generations. I'm the third generation agave farmer. So, I do know quite a bit about agave, but in no way am I an expert on it. I just want to, talk about agave genetics as far as I know it so that people can learn a little bit about the different agaves and maybe apply or plant different types of agaves and use them in different ways and just see really the diversity of the agave family that's available to them. So for starters, I wanted to, get into the big question here, right, that the podcast is centered over, because quite a few times every week I'm getting messages from people and from all over the world, and they see me, talking about different agaves, and they're just like, a lot of people ask me the question, how many different agave species are there? Because, people know that agave tequiliana can be used for tequila, and, dozens of agaves could be used for mezcal, a couple for rice, for raicilla. And, people know that there's certain agaves, but people always ask, like, oh, well, what's the number, like, how many are there? Because they want to know how broad this family is, right? Because especially with mezcal nowadays, everybody wants to see the new type of agave species that can be made into a spirit or something, right? So essentially, I'll try to simplify it, but it's a little bit of a complex question. That's why I felt the need to do a little podcast on it, right? Over here sorting some cactus seeds and trying to talk at the same time, so if I lose my spot, don't judge me too hard. But yeah, like this question, bit controversial. So why is it controversial? I say because there's so many different numbers that I come across. As I mentioned, I'm not a researcher or scientist or anything. I'm just reading all of the research, online, and the numbers that I see is in between 180 wild agave species and in between 210 wild agave species, and there's new species coming out every year that, not, well, I wouldn't say every year, but every few years you'll see some new agaves that are found in the wild that are newly discovered. Maybe a recent one might be agave muxi, which is a very, very beautiful agave that was recently discovered just a few years ago. And so when I say recently discovered, right, they're still in the wild, and it's just people haven't cataloged them or seen that they're different from more common agaves that people might be using. So yeah, there's a large variety of numbers that people give, right? But if we're taking the, say, average of that in between 180 and 210, you could say that there's 195, we'll just call it 200 flat, agave species that are wild, right? And then it starts to get a little weird because there's what they call natural hybrids, or I'm not sure if it's the widely used classification, but I call them natural hybrids. A couple other people call them wild hybrids, which are hybrids that are made in nature without too much human influence sometimes, and sometimes a little bit of human influence. So I'll give one example. The Proto-Americana, Agave Americana, lemon lime subspecies, right? So this is a subspecies of Agave Americana that is a wild hybrid that is coming, if I remember correctly, out of Oaxaca. And there was this hillside where two different agave species were on the hillside, Agave Americana being the main one, and then agave, once again, if I remember correctly, I think it was Asperima. And these two agaves mixed in the wild and essentially created the lemon lime agave Americana, which is a more compact agave Americana, but still has a lot of really cool traits from both of the parent agaves. It has like these lemon streaks, that's why it's nicknamed that. And I got a couple here on the farm. They're pretty cold tolerant and they grow pretty quickly. They're cool little wild hybrids. And then there might be hybrids that are more human influence, you could say, because there's agave collectors, nurseries, and farms that are pushing where they're planting a lot of this agave, close to the wild. In the farmer's case, many of them are wild cultivating this agave. So like they're maybe growing the seed and then planting it in the wild and harvesting at the end, right? So instead of in a farm, they're growing it in the wild. And a lot of these times they'll introduce species that aren't native to the region. Or, for instance, they might be having their farm and just everything on the farm, and on the edge of the farm is the wild, and then you got different agave interacting with their farmed agave, creating natural hybrids as well. It's just hybrids coming out of the cross-pollination between these agaves when there's natural pollinators like the bats, or sometimes even the humans will go rub pollen onto different agaves to see if different hybrids come out, right? And then so there's probably an estimated 70 to 100 wild natural hybrids that have just popped out in the wild that way, not from labs or greenhouses, just cross-pollination in the wild. So that 200 or average gets kind of bumped up to maybe 270 to 300, right? And these are all wild agaves, still prospering in the wild. And then it gets the agave genetics gets a little weird because, for instance, in the past year, there's been a lot of new research being done on the separation of different agave species. There's a lot of prominent researchers want to split agave into 3 new genuses in addition to agave, being echinocactus. I think the other one is paleocactus, and let me try to see if I can find the other one real quick. So echino, then you got para agave. So then essentially, people are trying to separate the agave based on their certain times that they devolved from each other back in the plant history, So then, for instance, these echino agaves might be like, an agave that you might know is the Albo pilosa, which is a very common agave that collectors have. If you're a farmer, you might be more, familiar with the agave stricta. And these are agaves that, people now want to classify as echino agave. I'm trying to figure out real quick why they're trying to do that. So it says they diverged approximately 4.15 million years ago from the genus agave, and they're polycarpic, so they don't die after flowering. That's interesting. I wonder if Well, this is where it gets kind of funky because there's interspecies hybrids, right? So like mojave would probably, because they're monocarpic, probably would fall into agave, but because it's a hybrid between an agave and a manfreda, then it probably is its own thing, to be honest with you. But I'm just kind of trying to say in the future this is maybe how the mangaves might be classified. But then you got the paleo agaves, which I actually have a few of those in my greenhouses, and I've farmed them and sold them when they were a little bit bigger because people love them. And well, the one I'm talking about that fits in this category, the paleo agave. Actually, it's the only agave in that category. And this one, this genus, they say branched out 6.18 million years ago. And by the way, I'm getting this info from the research article from ResearchGate, and the head I guess scientists or researchers on this is Jose Antonio Vasquez Garcia. Well, I guess there's a bunch of researchers on it, but that's the head guy. If you want to find it, it's called New Genera and New Combinations in Agaveaceae Aspergales, January 2024. So if you Google paleo agave, it should be like the third thingy that pops up, But getting back to the point, so paleo agave is one species that would be the squid agave. And the squid agave is super freaking cool. I first got them because, I heard they were monocarpic, which is true. They flower and they don't die. It's dope. And then they also are extremely cold tolerant. They took down to 10 Fahrenheit, and they even have taken up to the 120 Fahrenheit. The problem is that people like them, like I told you. So I had like 40, 50 of them growing super prosperously, and then one of my homies came that has a lot of money, and he's like, "Oh, I want those in my house. Can I buy them?" And like the mafia says, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I sold them. But I'll buy more, and I really want to buy seed from it. Like, a lot of the experiments I do is like, okay, I tested it, it works. Now I know I can scale it up in a certain way in the future, right? So the squid agave is super cool. And like I said, that's going to be your paleo agave. And then the para agave, the third new classification that they're trying to do, says 4.25 million years ago, divergence. And these agaves, I'm trying to see if maybe I could find an example of them, because I don't really know what this third class is. They say agave elementiana, which resembles agave attenuata, but I've never actually heard of that agave. It looks exactly like agave attenuata, I guess. But this agave, they're saying would be the third, these agave types would be the third genus that they're proposing. And once again, these genus additions are probably going to be what these agaves are going to start being referred to. So that's why I'm including them in the agave genetics, because a lot of these agaves will obviously be able to cross-pollinate and, work in hybridization with the other agave genus, so you'll be able to cross echino agave with para agave with what's this other one? Forgot right now, real quick. With the paleo agave, right back with the agave genus, right? So, if they do the new genuses classifications, then these would now start to be interspecies hybrids according to their little, I guess like terminologies and stuff, right? Like the mangaves are with manfreda and agave, but so yeah, like not only is there not a clear number on the amount of wild species of agave, there's not even clear understanding yet of how the differentiation is between these, right? So like this guy right here that I was telling you, Jose Antonio, he's proposing 3 new genuses in addition to the agave, right? So this is pretty new research, and like a lot of people are starting to shift to this classification of them, and it's going to be really interesting seeing how that goes. But I don't really care. I still will see them all as agaves, but I think it's pertinent to the agave genetics information. So then, that's just the wild stuff, you could say. And then it starts to get really funky because, there's tons of, you know, hybrids, for instance, that can be created, by cross pollinating agave. So you got all these collectors, nurseries, and farmers intentionally growing in greenhouses, and growing selected stuff out in the farms to intentionally cross certain species and doing it with hoping to select for certain traits that they're looking for in this agave. So I mean, a lot of the people are trying to add spines to spineless agave, trying to add cold tolerance to what I call the weak agaves, like agave tequiliana. All these agaves that can't take a frost or they'll die. uh, there's all of these types of hybrid projects that people are trying to do. People are trying to prioritize for fiber. Some people are trying to prioritize for disease, herbicide resistance, right? So I mean, for instance, the hybrids that I'm trying to make, when I get a lot more flowers and more ability to make these hybrids, or I might start trading people pollen, we'll see. But the hybrids that I'm focused on making are adding cold tolerance to a lot of the agaves because I want to push the agave genus further into cold climates, and to do that, I need them to be able to take some frost and some snow. So, I'm growing from seed agave montana and utahensis, and I got a couple larger plants, and I'm trying to mix those, for instance, with plants like agave americana. So, for instance, if I mix the agave utahensis with an agave americana, maybe I'll get a more compact agave americana that grows a little bit quicker, has a better cold tolerance, and can grow at higher latitudes. If I mix, for instance, an agave utahensis or montana, with a agave tequiliana, if I'm a Jalisciense tequilero and I'm trying to do something a little bit new, I'm going to be more familiar with the tequiliana, so maybe I want to mix these type of uniform sugars into an agave americana that's going to have more diverse sugars, and then maybe I want to grow something similar to what I'm already used to. Other people, for instance, I'll give a shout out to a lot of the Japanese collectors and nursery owners here, and all over Asia, Thailand, China. They're producing tons of beautiful sports and cultivars, growing agave from seed, and seeing the differentiation in genetics, and nicknaming these sports and cultivars, as well as making tons of really cool hybrids. Like, they'll, like, I've seen, man, like, it sucks because sometimes I can't remember all of this stuff at once, but I've seen really, really colorful and beautiful agave coming out of Japan that, it looks like all of them really, really love spines or really, really like soft leaf stuff. So, like, I was looking at my homie's page the other day that he's in Japan, and let me try to see if I can pull up his name real quick so I could give him a shout out. But this guy is freaking gnarly, man. Starts with a K. I think it's like Katopin or something like that. Yeah, Katopin. So, like, this guy makes a tons of cool little hybrids and stuff. And, I was looking at this one hybrid that, he I don't know if he made it or whatever, but it was like, it looked like a blue-green attenuata. And I was like, oh, man, that looks freaking sick. I need that, And then there was so yeah, that guy's named Katopin. And then I'm trying to find this other guy that I'm really, really a fan of. My bad, slow internet in the middle of the desi, you know what I mean? But this guy has got some cool hybrids as well. Let's see if I can find real quick. Oh, here he goes. Yamato Nursery. This guy's producing, like he brought out this one recent one that was like a agave hybrid. It looks super freaking sick. It's like a white green. It looks like a agave, maybe horrida mixed with like an agave. I don't even know, like asperima maybe. This guy has just got like an insane amount of cool stuff popping out. And then, let me try to shout it at another guy from Japan, well, that guy's got a name that I can't really say because it's kind of crazy. Well, the point is there's just tons of Japanese hybridizers that are pulling out really funky stuff, like color spine-wise, and, we're not doing too shabby here in California as well. We got people like hiddenagave and, this, what's his name? I'm trying to remember. I think it's Jeremy Spaff, and this guy's been hybridizing, like I saw one that he brought out, a Shawi hybridized with a Parasana. Shawi's a California native agave, so that was pretty cool. I was like, oh, like you can save a lot of the genetics from native agave by combining them into new stuff, and then he's also, made lots, if not dozens of other hybrids, and like a lot of the time that's the trippy part about this, that a lot of the hybrids, like they're just, they make a few of them, and then it's just like in between these collectors or in between these nurseries or small farmers, like they don't really go out to the public much, or if they do, they're really, really highly priced. But then, what ends up happening sometimes is like one person will buy a hybrid and then end up tissue culturing it and have it available, like by the hundreds of thousands to people, Like I give you an example, like I've made about 5-6 different hybrids that are unique. And I don't know if anybody made them before, but they were unique to me at the time. And then when I was a collector, I made these, and now, I ended up selling them, the genetics, and that person just has those agaves in their collection. They will never leave the collection. A lot of people just have agave to like kind of show off, it's like, oh, I got this Ferrari or Lamborghini, because it's one of one. It's like you can't get another one. You have to create another one, and it'll be something a little bit different, because each plant is unique. So that's why these things are really cool. But then the problem behind tissue culturing a really, unique hybrid like that is that all the tissue cultured plants are going to be the same, and that's where the agave genetics can get a little weird too, because I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, we can tissue culture endangered agave and then try to save a lot of agave genetics that way. But, you're really only saving that one particular plant genetic. So, like, if I take a Utahensis, or I'll give a better example, a Shawi that's super endangered in California, the feds haven't caught on, they're crazy. So this is a super endangered, and then I try to tissue culture it, right? And I make like 100,000 of them. Well, now these 100,000 agave Shawi that were now endangered, I have a whole bunch of them, right? Well, now one plague could take them out. One, fungus, one insect, like, so they're all going to have the same genetics. They're genetically identical. So the good part behind tissue culture is it could produce a lot of the same plant, right? Very quickly, faster than they would come out, by you propagating it in the greenhouse. But then you have to put those to flower and put the seed out so that you have in the second generation genetic, diversity. Because if not, then you just end up screwing yourself down the line because everything's the same. Like I give an example, like all the tissue cultured plants from maybe a big box store can be the same, and then a plague might affect that plant, and the plague learns how to destroy that plant, and then it's hopping all over the world destroying everybody's version of that plant because they're all freaking tissue cultured, right? Whereas now if they're all grown by seed and hybridizing, then you're going to have all this new genetic divergence that can withstand an attack from a biological attack, you could say, from a fungus or from insects or from different stuff, right? So that's where some Mexican hybridizers are trying to do now. They're trying to take, agaves that are, being affected. One second, taking some seed out of this bag. They're trying to take agave that's affected in Jalisco, in different places in Mexico, heavily by the agave weevil, and they're trying to hybridize that agave with different agaves that are more resistant to the agave weevil. So, like, I've seen tons of different agave species have, varying resistance to this agave weevil here in California. I've never seen it on Agaveville Moriana. I've never seen it on, I've seen it on Paris. I've seen it on Tequiliana. I've seen it in pictures. I've seen it on Americana. The point is, if it hasn't attacked a new species yet, then it's going to have a much harder time going onto that species, right? So, and at the same time, they're trying to figure out ways, like I said, to hybridize more resistance out, right? So when they see an agave isn't being attacked at all, then they can try to combine that, for instance, with a tequiliana to find, a more resistant plant to agave weevil. But the problem, that's where the law in Jalisco kind of screws them, because they're, limited to only using like that Blue Weber Agave Tequiliana cloned variety, you know what I mean? And then when you do that, then you can't take the benefits out of a lot of these hybrid trials and stuff like that, right? Like, I'll give an example in Mezcal or in Oaxaca, if they have this agave weevil problem, they can hybridize a different agave, make a hybrid that's resistant to the weevil or to a fungus that's threatening these species, and then they can plant that and they can still make mezcal, right? Because it's within their denomination, the ability to do that. So Jalisco kind of shooting themselves in the foot by limiting themselves to one type of agave there. But that's a podcast for another day, man. I'm like the opposite of a lot of the Jaliscenses, growing like as many species as I can get my hands on. But yeah, there's other people that are hybridizing, for instance, the famous hybrid that is for fiber production that is grown in the majority of the world, or I don't know if in the majority of the world, but here, let me get the exact thing here. So hybrid H11648 is a lab-made hybrid by tissue culture, and you can combine and make different agaves within the tissue culture. I'm not too familiar with that process, but from what I know is that they can take two different agaves and two different parts from the agave and combine them and then tissue culture them. So, I know that's probably an oversimplification, but that's how they do it. And then, this one hybrid is the most, H11648 is the most commonly used for fiber in Brazil, Africa, China. I'm not sure if that is still today in 2024, because this is a few years old, what I'm reading right now. But then, it's very surprising because, like I said, a lot of these people are hybridizing for fiber, and then, the biggest fiber producer is Brazil, actually, and then Mexico, and then the next few nations are African nations, and the African nations are creating tons of sisal hybrids and stuff that are more, good for their fiber production or might differentiate their fiber production. So that's really interesting, too, that these African countries are, contributing to genetics and then improving genetics as well. And then one question I had for a lot of my researcher friends, I'm not sure if maybe someone that listens to the podcast can answer this, but there's 10, or if we're reading that H11648 hybrid, I read that as there's more than 10,000 hybrids that have been made in the lab. And then from what I'm reading in the studies, it doesn't look like they pan all these hybrids out, right? So they do lots of mixing or hybridizing, and then they see one that's promising, and then they kind of kill all the rest or shelve the rest, So I guess what I'm saying is there could potentially have been tens of thousands of agave hybrids created all over the world, but maybe only hundreds or maybe 1,000 are coming out of those lab tissue cultured, and then But that's still pretty significant, right? Because if we had 270 wild, now we're outing, potentially thousands of lab tissue cultured hybrids that are being created, or we're adding, a lot of different ones that people are just naturally hybridizing out in the wild for these different traits, as I mentioned, right? So that could be another set of thousands. And then you start adding in the collectors and the nurseries and these people, just combining everything for fun and just seeing what pops out. I mean, I would estimate in between the tissue cultured stuff, between hybrids that are just in gardens that people don't even know about because these agaves been growing for generations in their yards. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then between people that are like intentionally making hybrids, there's probably 3,000 plus hybrids that are available around the world. I'm not sure how many are available from the lab for people to like access and stuff, right? But lots and lots of hybrids that are coming from all over, right? Like agave moonshine is an agave that was made from a Dutch collector and then brought to California. You got the agave franzoni. That's a cultivar that was brought over from Italy. The sisal agave. Many of the varieties we use were developed in Africa and brought back to America or Brazil, or were developed in Brazil and brought to Mexico. So it's like there's a lot of exchange of these genetic material. And then for instance, what I was talking about in the gardens is just like I've run a landscaping and gardening company, and that's how I had access to lots of different diverse agaves. And I learned that there was in these multi-million dollar homes, gardens that were sometimes grown for 50, 60, 70 years with great gardeners, great irrigation, these agaves being pampered, and they had tons of different cacti and agave species, and they were hybridizing all over. And then, a lot of my job most of the time was to go rip all this stuff out, and I would go to the dump and take all these genetics, and I felt bad. So then I started collecting it all and bringing that cacti and, agave genetics that was all over LA County, Ventura County, like all over surrounding LA that I worked. And I started trying to save a lot of these cultivars and hybrids that I saw. Because then a lot of the times I'd show up to gardens and remove the mature stuff and how should I put it? I would play with that mature stuff over here at the farm. I bring the young stuff, replant it. And then, a lot of these hybrids, I would be so confused because I'd be like, where the hell did this freaking plant come from? It's not any of these bigger, more mature plants. And what I started realizing after I knew about hybridizing was that these were hybrids. They were like, if you had an agave americana and an agave la fanta in a garden, boom, hybrid, over a certain amount of years because they were just naturally propagating and, people started seeing these things, right? So I started collecting some of them, and some of them hit, some of them didn't hit here on the farm. But lots of stuff coming out of gardens in urban environments from LA to San Francisco to, big cities, I'm sure, where gardening is popular in Brazil and, Italy and all over the world. These things are just naturally hybridizing, and in lots of places, like even in LA, even if the irrigation breaks, they still got enough water and they're able to like continuously naturally hybridize, even if people are like moving and not taking care of their garden, right? So it gets really freaking like interesting when you start thinking about the number of hybrids that are out there. But yeah, about 75% of all the agave species are in Mexico. 25% are from United States. Agave utaensis, Shawi, Pari, Parisana, Arizonica, all these ones in America, and then it goes all the way down to agave, that might be in Venezuela and South America, such as agave cocuy. So it's been used by dozens of countries. The genetics has been improved by dozens of countries. There's research papers globally on agave from dozens of countries, Africa, Latin America, North America. It's pretty crazy to see like how many people are working on this. One more thing about the hybrid breeding thing too, is that, people are going to try to do what they did with Roundup Ready crops here in America, because I'm already reading about it, and they're trying to come up with agave species in the lab through tissue culture, hybridization, and different methods. Coming up with an agave that would be herbicide resistant. So just like these Roundup Ready crops, you could go in and spray, these really nasty herbicides and kill everything, the the soil, the insects, the other competing ground cover plants like small animals, rodents, all the pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides, right? But the plant won't die. So, for instance, like in the corn system, right, they go in, they spray everything, boom, dies. But the corn's still living, prospering. So these herbicides are meant, or these plants, well, in the case of corn, actually, it's a GMO thing, but they're trying to do this agave hybridization just in the lab, and because it's available to do so, and through natural wild hybridization. Um, But yeah, they're trying to make this agave that could just be sprayed, and then you wouldn't have to worry about weeding, and you wouldn't have to worry about the fungus and the weevil and none of that, because you could just spray it and it would be like Roundup Ready. You could just, run the spray and you got your agave ready, right? I think that's a horrible idea, but I should, it's relevant to this topic, so I had to mention it. I'm sure California and the U.S. will be working on that with people like Monsanto and Bayer, but I won't be participating. There's going to be, some that try to prioritize the leaves, some that try to prioritize the pinas. If you're going for energy production, you might try to prioritize the pinas. If you're going for fiber production, you might try to make new cultivars, sports, and hybrids that are coming out of, or that are more fiber production. Well, that brings me to another point. You might try to prioritize seed production as well. If you're like me, trying to promote the use of seeds and have lots of seed to plant to see what pops out, right? Because I love seed because you never know what's going to pop out. You know what I mean? When you got a clone and you plant it, that thing's going to be pretty much the same like the mom, Like I've shown you some Agave Americana species like the Medio Picta alba that do have some differentiation when, like they'll revert back to all blue and still have a little variegated and not have that white blue. But it's rare, Most of the time it's like 99% they're going to be pretty much like the mom through cloned. So that's why I don't like that. When you plant the seed, you never know what's going to pop out. You might get a new cultivar. Like I was planting some Agave Desmetiana, and then this Agave Desmetiana brought out a new sport that I have that I called High Vista. I was planting some, what do you call it? What agave was that? I forgot. Oh, the Agave Vilmoriana. And then I got a variegated version of it. And I've seen people's variegated versions of it, and they kind of look like a variegated Agave Desmetiana. It's like not so funky. I got kind of like a real funky, wavy variegation. So that's one I, for instance, when you get something cool like that, you can patent it. You can, you can mass propagate it through the tissue culture. Although I was telling you there's problems with that, but I'll talk to you about the patent route. Well, now I guess we can talk about interspecies hybrids because that's where I'm going. The mongaves, right? The mongaves, most of them are all patented. And they're like, I think, 20-year patents. And then you can't grow this seed without their permission, or this agave. You can't tissue culture it, my bad, without their permission and make a whole bunch of them and try to make a bunch of money, And if you do that, you're going to pay royalties to them. And I think if you use their agave, like in a spirit, you probably maybe pay royalties to them or something, Like if you were trying to sell it in a commercial. But here's the thing, I think the patent is good in one way and bad in another way. It's good in one way that it protects this person's, research. Like these people researched really hard to come up with mangaves, right? Well, they do now. But the original mangave was just accidental mixing between an agave and a manfreda that flowered, I think, in a greenhouse, and they noticed it, and then they just started making a whole bunch of mongaves because they're like, this is dope, adding two or interspecies hybrids, right? So there's interspecies hybrids, which are like the mangave. Now you have a manfreda, which is a whole other plant, and then you're mixing it with an agave. The manfreda is like, really colorful, super funky plant, like color-wise, with spots, and then it has lots of saponins, been used by lots of indigenous, much like agave. Well, this manfreda can basically be mixed with the agave, and you come out with some mangave species, right? And then now you have mangave that could get, compared to the manfreda, a little bit bigger, but then you have an agave that grows a little bit quicker because it's a manfreda, and you have lots of new unique sugars and colors on the outside. It's sugars for the spirits, but then the colors on the outside, maybe for like collectors or landscaping and stuff, like they really love it. So it's super interesting, right, on that end, like the mangaves and the patent situation. The patents can be used for evil to try to prevent people, right, from ever accessing the plant. But I've seen the mangave. I think the most people that are making, or the main people making mangaves, are mad about mangave, that brand, and then they brought out like 100 different mangaves, and lots of other people are making triple hybrids now, where you have a mangave that you might mix with another plant, and now you have 25% of one agave, 25% of another agave, and 50% of an agave. So you can have different percentages of the plant, right? Because if I'm making I'll give you an example. Mangave tube fairy is a shawi, and I think an agave shawi and a mangave blood spot. Well, if I now combine that with an agave americana, I'm going to get 50% americana, 25% mangave blood spot, and then 25% of the agave shawi. So then now you have three agaves that are combined in a triple hybrid, and you can just continue doing that amount of really funky, how would I call it, hybridization and genetic differentiation and innovation. So that's where it could get really cool, the interspecies hybrids, right? There's another one called what is it called? It's like chloro. It's here native to California. My homie or my friend Momo's Garden on Instagram posted about it, and I was like, oh, that's freaking dumb, or that's freaking dope, native California. Let me see if it pops up right here. God damn it. Well, I know exactly where it's at. It's going to be in my Instagram. Because I freaking was talking to this person in the convo with it, right? So Momo's Garden introduced me to this plant, and it's a bulb that's native to California, used by the indigenous for their saponins and fibers and stuff, much like agave. And, essentially, let me see the plant's name. It's called soap plant, essentially. But I'm trying to find the actual like Latin name, because obviously there's like a lot of soap plants, Chlorogallum is the genus Pomeranianum. That's a freaking ringer. So then this plant here, I think, has good potential to make an interspecies hybrid, because it looks just like manfreda, acts like manfreda, and I think could bring, a lot of cool different traits into agave. Another one that I might suggest for interspecies, hybridization, like I got so many different experiments that I want to do that I'm just like, okay, well, I know I can't do all of them or remember all of them, but if I talk about it with people, then maybe you guys could do some of them, right? So when I'm telling you I want to do these experiments, you do them too, man. Don't just let me do them. I want to combine try combining a Hespero Yucca Whipley, which I call the Sotola California, because it has 7,000 years of use by the Southern California indigenous tribes. This Hespero Yucca Whipley has similar bricks level, similar growth to an agave, looks like an agave. It's in the Agaveaceae family. I think it might combine, who knows? But those are something that I think people might start making spirits out of, because they're being able to grow all over California, and they're really interesting plants that what you call it I got on my land in the LA forest, and they're stay tuned for that one. I'll maybe make another podcast on that. Just the Sotola California Hesperouca Whippley, because there's just a bunch of crazy things I have about that. So yeah, just in summary, maybe 200 wild, 100 natural hybrids, 100 mangaves, thousands coming hybrids from hybridizers, from tissue culture labs to nurseries to collectors all over the world, from Japan and America. Like I said, if you want to see a really cool hybridizer, visit Hidden Agave on Instagram. Really cool plants that he's bringing out. And then there's really cool Japanese hybridizers as well. Let's see if I want to talk about anything else here real quick. So, yeah, a lot of people, debate between using the word sports and cultivars, but I use them when the plant is something that comes from seed, because essentially, I don't classify something that might be a little bit different from the original parent as a subspecies. I classify that as just a cultivar or a sport, how I was telling you. For instance, if you take a sport and you let the flower go to flower and you try to get seed from that, it might not have at all any relation to your sport. It'll probably revert back to the original, right? You would have to tissue culture that to try to continue that whatever you found there, right? So, I mean, I'll give an example and a shout out to my homie Mojave LV on Instagram. This guy grows Agave utahensis, and there could be certain types of like light stresses or mutations that happen with agave that change the color, and these could be probably considered by many different cultivars. So he grows his agave under LED, and then I told him, I'm like, dude, these are some of the most blue agave utahensis I ever seen. Like, I'm pretty sure the LEDs are affecting it, and he thinks so as well. But that's just a theory. Maybe it would have to take more research. That's just based on observation, right? Doesn't mean correlation. But interesting stuff like that. Stressing, I have seen it in the mangaves. I will say that. So I've seen mangaves like Pineapple Express be purple green, and then in the sun, and I bring them into the greenhouse, and now they're blue, green, purple. It's really interesting, the color changes. And I might see that like a lighter green or blue on certain agaves growing in the shade. But then, there's all like if you're farming, maybe you're going to have lower bricks, but if you want it for landscape, you're going to have different colors. So it's like you got to play with it there, depending on what you're going to be selling it for. And then let's see here. So yeah, other people are going to try to breed out for biofuels, try to breed out for, energy densities on these piñas. And there's going to be lots of interesting stuff that pops out, I believe, in the future. As I mentioned, I've made a couple hybrids here that I regret selling out to collectors, just because they will never see the public, and people, like I was a gardener and landscaper, so like I would clear out people's like 50-year-old agave or cacti collections, you know what I mean? And then like a lot of people, when they die, like their family's just not going to give a fuck about this, and they're probably going to be thrown away to the dump, or like if they're lucky, they'll find a gardener like me who's also a farmer that it could go to, but it's rare, And then now if I make a hybrid, like what I was talking to you about the patents, what I'd like to do is like, maybe make a really nice hybrid that California agave farmers could use, but then make this hybrid under a patent. So then, for instance, like much like the CRT regulates how Agave tequiliana, one certain subspecies is used, or species, depending who you ask, used for a spirit, I'd like to regulate how that agave is for lack of a description, exploited, right? So if you have a patent, say I brought out an Agave utahensis times Agave americana, certain variety that I really like, and I patent it and I tissue culture it and I make it available to all these different farmers, and I make that like the Gen 1 and I make different generations going forward, right? I can make a patent and then everybody would have to follow how to make the spirits with that, how to make different products with that. And you could regulate the use of the name of that agave being adulterated. You get me? Because it's like I see a lot of problems with the regulatory agencies in Mexico, like the CRT and CRM. But patents can kind of make it a good version of them in some ways, but then they can also be used for evil, like I was telling you, because then people don't want to ever allow people to grow this in a certain way. So like the mojave, I can't grow it without paying royalties and stuff, so then like if I hybridize it with another plant, now that plant's different, but it's in completely different new species, right, that I can put a patent on myself, or I could put a patent and leave it for free for everybody for free use, like, and they could do whatever they want with it as long as they acknowledge that I made it, right? But in the case with the mojave, it's like, you have to grow it to seed or hybridize it with something else, and you can't tissue culture, replicate it, and try to farm it a whole bunch, right? So that's where they limit, like, the potential of the mongaves being farmed, right? So like the mongaves that are out right now will probably not be farmed for spirits, but then they'll be used to be crossed into new agave species, and those hybrids will be used for spirits. So I feel bummed out I can't like use without paying like royalties on some of these agaves, but then I told you, like, these people deserve that recognition and the profits from that too, because they spent decades creating this stuff, right? So it's really interesting. I think that in the future there's going to be a lot of really, really cool stuff that comes out. Stay tuned. We'll see what we pump out here, what other people from California pump out. But I guess the whole goal of this podcast today was just to show you how complex answering the question of how many agave species there is, because not even the people that like their whole freaking life and job is dedicated to researching agave could answer that question, I believe, because they don't even know the new agaves out there, right? I try to do it to the best of my ability, just show you the diversity of the family, some of the controversies in classifications, the amount of diversity that is available to you as a collector, nursery, or farmer, and hopefully by learning some of this differentiation within the agave family, you want to try to grow some of these different things for different products. Like I mentioned, every agave has a different flavor, different sugar content, different chemical compounds. Like Agave Vilmoriana, the one that I really, really love, is going to be, I believe, something big in biomedical research because of the amount of saponins that are in it. Hobbley, I would say the same, but it's endangered. So that high saponin thing might be its fucking death, honestly. I don't want to say that. But the Vilmoriana, I got like fucking infinite of them, so we can use that for biomedical saponin research and stuff. And that's going to be a whole other podcast, saponins. There's so much important shit behind saponins. But catch you later. This is the third recording of this freaking podcast because the podcast thing messed me up. But hope you enjoyed it. And you got any questions on agave genetics, let me know. And go out there and make some super cool freaking agave, no matter where you are around the world. Peace out, y'all.